7 years ago, I was Aurora, a bright-eyed adventure guide with dreams as vast as the open skies I longed to explore. I spent my days guiding others through thrilling landscapes, imagining that one day, I'd make the whole world my playground. Life was full of promise, a canvas waiting to be painted with stories of adventure. Then everything changed when I met Ethan. He was charismatic, ambitious, and seemed to have the world at his fingertips. His charm was magnetic, and I was drawn to him in ways I couldn't explain. We fell in love fast and hard, and before I knew it, I was walking down the aisle, convinced I had found my forever. In the beginning, it felt like a dream come true. Ethan's success and confidence were intoxicating, and I reveled in the idea of building a life together. But one evening, as we sat down to dinner, he revealed an exciting development in his career. "I got an offer," he said, his eyes alight with enthusiasm. "It's from one of the top law firms in the country. It's the kind of opportunity people wait their whole lives for." I forced a smile, trying to mirror his excitement, but my chest tightened. His news meant uprooting our lives and moving to a new city, far from everything familiar, including my job. "Wow, Ethan," I said softly, "that's amazing." Despite my initial hesitation, I convinced myself it was the right choice. Love meant sacrifice, didn't it? We packed up and moved into a beautiful, spacious house that Ethan proudly called our future. At first, it felt like a fresh start, even an adventure of its own. But as the days turned into weeks, the man I had fallen in love with began to change. It started subtly, with little criticisms. "This place is a mess," Ethan remarked one evening, gesturing to the boxes still scattered in the living room. "Why can't you unpack faster? I can't live like this." I laughed nervously, brushing it off as stress from his demanding new job. But soon, the comments became more frequent and harsher. Finding work in our new city wasn't easy, and when I mentioned returning to my passion for adventure guiding, Ethan dismissed it immediately. "That's not a real job," he said firmly. "Your focus should be on keeping things in order here. That's your role now." His words stung, but I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I told myself it was temporary, that he was under pressure, and things would eventually go back to the way they were, but they didn't. Over time, my days became consumed with chores, errands, and an unrelenting pressure to meet Ethan's impossible standards. He demanded perfection, and nothing I did seemed to be enough. When I suggested hiring help, his reaction was swift and cutting. "Why would we waste money on that? You're perfectly capable," he snapped. The man I had once adored was now a stranger, a volatile, controlling force in my life. His temper flared often, and I learned to tread carefully, hoping to avoid his wrath. One evening, as I prepared dinner, he stormed into the kitchen. "Where's my food?" he barked, loosening his tie. I hurried to serve him, but when he noticed something amiss, a missing condiment, a dish not to his liking, his anger boiled over. With a sharp motion, he overturned the plate, sending its contents spilling across the table and onto the floor. "Clean this up," he ordered coldly, walking away without a glance. Kneeling on the floor, I picked up the pieces, hot tears welling in my eyes. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "This isn't what you wanted, this isn't who you are." Still, I clung to hope, believing I could fix things. The next day, I spent hours preparing Ethan's favorite meal, determined to please him, but as I set the table, I realized I'd forgotten to buy bread. When Ethan walked in, I greeted him with a smile that masked my anxiety. "Dinner's ready," I said cheerfully, serving the soup. He glanced at the table, his expression darkening. "Where's the bread?" "I forgot," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. His face twisted with contempt. "Are you serious? Can't you do anything right?" Before I could respond, he grabbed the bowl and flung it across the room. The scalding soup splashed onto my leg, and I cried out in pain. "Pathetic," he muttered, walking away as I stood frozen in disbelief. That night, as I cleaned up the mess, a realization hit me like a thunderbolt. The life I had built was a far cry from the one I had dreamed of. The adventurous, hopeful girl I once was felt like a distant memory, buried beneath years of pain and compromise. I sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen, clutching a shard of broken porcelain, my reflection staring back at me from its glossy surface. For the first time in years, I let the tears fall freely, each drop carrying the weight of unspoken fears and shattered dreams. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't live like this anymore. I showed Sadie the message, my hands trembling as I passed her the phone. She read it, and her eyes immediately blazed with fiery determination. "He just signed his own death warrant," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "We've got him now." As we left the studio together, the cool evening air felt charged with anticipation. I knew a storm was brewing, a confrontation that had been years in the making. But for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt armed, ready to fight for my freedom and reclaim the life I had lost. In the following days, my world transformed into a whirlwind of activity. There were interviews with reporters, consultations with legal experts, and meetings with women's advocacy groups who offered support and solidarity. Ethan's threats continued, each one more venomous than the last, but instead of scaring me, they only fueled my resolve. One morning, as I sipped my coffee and tried to steady my nerves, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. "Hello, this is Aurora," I answered cautiously. "Ms. Peterson?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Emery Reeves. I'm a family lawyer, and I'd like to help with your case." I hesitated. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't afford an attorney right now," I said honestly. "You misunderstand," Emery interjected firmly. "My firm will represent you pro bono. We've been watching Ethan Peterson for years. Your case might be the key to exposing him for who he really is." It turned out Ethan had burned bridges and made powerful enemies throughout his career. Emery's firm had represented several people who had suffered under his manipulative tactics. To them, my case wasn't just about me, it was an opportunity to challenge a system that had allowed Ethan to thrive unchecked. The very next day, I sat across from Emery and her team in a sleek conference room, the air buzzing with determination. I handed over every piece of evidence I had, texts, recordings, even photos. Emery's eyes widened as she flipped through the files. "This is incredible," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "With this, we can not only win your divorce case but potentially have grounds to disbar Ethan." As we prepared for court, I began to understand that this was no longer just my fight. It was a battle for justice, not just for me but for everyone Ethan had wronged. When the divorce proceedings began, Ethan came out swinging. His legal team painted a picture of me as an unstable, vindictive woman trying to ruin his stellar reputation. "Mrs. Peterson is an erratic, alcoholic spouse who has been fabricating these accusations out of sheer spite," Ethan's lawyer declared to the court. To my horror, Ethan's mother, Victoria, took the stand, her voice trembling with feigned emotion as she recounted fabricated stories of my supposed drunken antics. "She was a disgrace at Ethan's company party," Victoria sobbed. "My son has endured so much because of her." I felt my stomach churn, but beside me, Emery leaned in and whispered, "Stay calm. We've got this." When it was our turn, Emery was relentless. She played the recordings of Ethan's abusive tirades, projected his threatening messages on the courtroom screen, and systematically dismantled his lies. "Your Honor," Emery said, her voice commanding, "the evidence speaks for itself. Mr. Peterson's pattern of manipulation and abuse is undeniable." She called witnesses who corroborated my story. Sadie took the stand, recounting how she had picked me up one night from a dangerous situation. "Objection," Ethan's lawyer barked. "Hearsay." "Overruled," the judge said. "Continue, Miss Thompson." Another witness, Maya, a store manager, testified about the night I had fled to her store in desperation, seeking refuge. The turning point came when Emery presented a toxicology report. "Your Honor," she announced, holding up the report, "this analysis of Mrs. Peterson's hair confirms the presence of sedatives consistent with her claims of being drugged by Mr. Peterson." The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Ethan leapt to his feet. "She's lying," he shouted. "This is all fabricated." "Mr. Peterson, sit down," the judge said sternly. "One more outburst, and I will hold you in contempt." As the evidence mounted, Ethan's composure crumbled. His confident smirk was replaced by anger and desperation, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. After hours of testimony and deliberation, the judge finally delivered the verdict. After reviewing all evidence, "This court rules in favor of Mrs. Aurora Peterson," Judge Harris announced. Gasps filled the room as the judge detailed the ruling. "Mr. Ethan Peterson is to pay alimony, forfeit half of all shared assets, and compensate for emotional distress. He will also cover all legal expenses. Furthermore, this court grants a restraining order against Mr. Peterson, prohibiting him from any form of contact with Mrs. Peterson. Ethan erupted, his face red with fury. This is insane. You can't do this to me, he shouted. The judge fixed him with a stern glare. Mr. Peterson, I suggest you remain silent. Given the evidence presented, you are fortunate this court is not pursuing criminal charges. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the trial, a wave of relief washed over me. For the first time in years, I felt free. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of sorrow, they were tears of triumph. I had fought for my life, my truth, and my dignity, and I had won.